Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our presentation. My name is Greg Johnson, and I'm a member of the Illuminating Engineers Society, Education Committee Chair for the IES Raleigh section, and Senior Electrical Designer at Loring Consulting Engineers. I'd like to welcome you today to our presentation on simplifying, understanding, and applying IES TM-30. We have a great discussion lined up for you today, but before we get started, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat Q&A box, so feel free to submit any questions during the presentation, and we'll try to address as many questions as we can and as time permits at the end of the presentation. Also, if you are an AIA registered architect and you'd like to receive the AIA LU credit, you can email me. We'll need the name of the architect as AIA knows you, as well as your number. And I will post in the chat box my email address, so you can email directly to me. And lastly, just a reminder, the video will be recorded and it'll be archived on the YouTube channel. I'll go ahead and post a link to the YouTube channel as well, just to allow you to view it in the future and recommend to others. And finally, just make sure to keep your cameras off and microphones off during the presentation. So today we're happy to welcome Jason Livingston and Bob Henderson. Let me first introduce you to Bob Henderson. He's worked in the lighting industry for many years as lighting consultant, training instructor, sales agent, and is a emeritus member of IES and has served 3 times as the section president for the Raleigh IES section. And that's just to name a few. So thank you for joining us, Bob, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate that. It's my pleasure to introduce Jason to everyone today. So the first 2 decades of Jason's career, he spent as a theatrical lighting designer before he saw the light, and he transitioned over into both architectural lighting, but he still did also theatrical lighting design. So as an architectural designer, some of the spaces that he worked on included residences, and they still include residences, high-end retail, corporate offices, restaurants, places of worship, and theaters. He currently teaches architectural lighting design at New York School of Interior Design, Pratt Institute, and also New York University, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. Jason is co-chair of the IES Color Committee. And in talking with Jason, he indicated he'd been a member of the Color Committee for 12 years, which means we go all the way back to the beginning of TM-30, and he's got a really rich history in that, as well as the prior metrics as well. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in theater art from University of Miami. So yes, he has gotten out of the city. And then also he has his master's from in theater lighting design from the New York University. And his book is Designing with Light, 2nd edition. So I'm going to hold this up. This is it right here. And let me just see if I can take this off the blur so you can see actually what it looks like. So here it is right here. And I would recommend this. I've read this book, and he uses this in his classes for both graduate as well as undergraduate courses. So without further ado, Jason, welcome. Thank you for being with us today, and we look forward to the discussion. Take it away, please.
Okay, thank you, Bob. And welcome everybody to Simplifying, Understanding, and Applying TM-30. I'm going to go rather quickly today. Bob has asked me to try to keep this at about a half an hour so that we have plenty of time for discussion and Q&A. So I'm just going to dive right in. First of all, I want to thank both the IES Raleigh section, obviously, for having us here today. I also want to thank the Lighting Agora. They're the organization that has allowed us to be able to offer the AIA credits. AIA statement, you are all familiar with seeing this. I'm not going to read this to you. You can probably read it faster than I can. Likewise, with the learning objectives, you can read these to yourself faster than I can speak them, so I'm just going to keep on keeping on. Couple of things before we get started. I am assuming that most of you have some familiarity with TM30. If you don't, and if some of this seems to be flying past you or is leaving you a little confused, there are some really, really good resources online. And most particularly for those of you that are IES members, there was a terrific, terrific tutorial in Leocos magazine a couple of years ago that was written by Michael Royer. And I can certainly send Bob or Greg the link to that and to other resources. So if that would be helpful for you, email them and I'll get those resources in their hands and they can get it off to you. Most of my TM30 discussions start with a background in color science to understand really what it is that we're doing with TM30. I'm going to skip over that today. So it's going to make it a little bit more palatable, I hope. Also, because TM30 produces, believe it or not, 149 measurements, we're not going to be talking about most of those, and we're not going to be talking about most of the numbers that are associated with them, so that we can get really to the heart of the matter from the specifier's perspective, which is Annex E of TM30 and the specifications that it contains for color rendering of light sources, right? That's really where we want to get, and how we use those throughout the design process. So I think that most of you are familiar with the definition of color rendering, which is right here. The CIE and the IES hold the same definition. And when we apply this definition and we take a look at CRI, we would describe CRI as a fidelity metric, right? That is the comparison, which is up here. I don't know if you're able to see my mouse. The comparison of the light source that we're interested in to a standard reference light source. And with CRI and with other fidelity metrics, the question that's being asked is, how closely does the light source in question match the reference light source? That's the only question that's being asked. Now, I know that CRI has been loaded up with additional meanings, right? High CRI is best. High CRI is natural. High CRI is something else. Really, though, that's the only question that CRI is asking and answering. How close is the match? And because of that, and because CRI was introduced in 1965, over the intervening, 58 years, color rendering and color fidelity have come to become synonymous simply because we've only had one color rendering measuring system and its measured fidelity. But there's more going on. We could ask ourselves, does a light source render object colors in a way that we would perceive as being natural? And naturalness and fidelity, while related, are not the same thing. We could ask, does a light source render objects in a way that we preferred? So, okay, it's not a perfect match to the reference light source, but the way in which colors appearances are shifted, I actually like better. We could ask about vividness. Is this light source capable of making a broad range of colors seem more vivid or more saturated? And what about discrimination? Is the spectrum of this light source such that I can appropriately sort very, very, very similar colors? Turns out that for these and other color rendering aspects, high fidelity is not the answer. But with CRI, high fidelity has been the only answer that can be given. So what these other aspects of color rendering require is that we look at the way in which the spectrum of light is causing colors to shift and understanding what those shifts are so that we can sort of understand whether those shifts are something that appears natural or something that is preferred or something that is vivid. So what do we mean when we're talking about color shifts? Well, there are two that are really important to us. The first one is chroma shift, right? Some light sources will cause certain colors either to appear more saturated or to appear less saturated or slightly grayed out. Vividness or chroma shifting is an important component in the perception of naturalness. It's also an important component in preference in color rendering. And it's important for us to keep in mind, though, that chroma shifting or color shifts are not global. So in this arrow here, we're seeing that perhaps there's a light source that is making the green more saturated. That does not mean that it is also making yellows and reds and blues and purples more saturated. So we need to take a look at what an SPD is doing on a sort of hue by hue basis. It's not global. The other thing that we know that can happen is that a spectrum or an SPD can cause colors to shift in their hue, right? So at my grocery store, bananas always look green, regardless of how ripe they are, because of the SPD of the light source. So hue is important for a lot of reasons. The example I just gave you, is a banana ripe or not? And as with chroma shifting, we want to keep in mind that as we look at hue shifting, we need to understand that it is not global. Just because a light source makes green appear more yellow, and so it's rotating color appearance, in this case counterclockwise, does not mean that the same thing is happening for reds and blues. So here's what we're talking about. We can have a light source that has very high fidelity, right? Like this apple in the center. The apple looks like an apple. We can have a light source that causes a positive chroma shift, and in this case makes the apple look redder than it would under high fidelity. We can have a light source that causes a chroma shift that is negative. That is, it dulls the red, it moves the red closer to gray. We can have a light source that causes a hue shift of red towards yellow. We could have a light source that causes a hue shift of red towards purple. And theoretically, as long as the magnitude of the color shifting is consistent, all four of these light sources could have a CRI of 80. So if we want to understand, is a light source rendering colors in a way that is preferred or natural or vivid, we need to understand what's happening to color shifts. And that tells us that one metric, such as CRI, is simply not enough, because it's not giving us any directionality of the color shifts, and it's not telling us which hues are being shifted. So a broader, more thorough understanding of color rendering of a light source can only be achieved if we are, yes, still looking at color fidelity, but also looking at chroma shift, also looking at hue shift, and then looking at the perceptual implications of those three things. That would allow us to then sort a light source, right? Yes, this one is preferred, this one renders colors in a way that is natural, etc. TM-30 is what does that for us, right? This is the magic of TM-30, is that with the 149 measurements that it produces, and we don't need to know all of them, we can analyze a light source and its spectrum and understand what's happening to colors. So I said we were going to get very quickly to Annex E. That's it. We've gone through all of TM-30, and now we're in Annex E. And what we want to talk about are what we call design intents. So when TM-30 came out in 2015, we knew that the science was the most up-to-date, and we knew that the science was accurate. What we didn't know was what were the meaningful measures, and how might we interpret or apply those meaningful measures. There were quite a few studies that were done with TM-30 very, very quickly, so that by 2018, we, on the color committee, were able to do a sort of a meta-analysis of 5 of the best studies, looking at the spectrums that they analyzed, the perceptual responses of the test subjects, the relevant measures and values of the SPDs. And we were able to analyze that and come to the very firm and really great understanding that TM-30 allows us to achieve, with a high degree of certainty, three color rendering goals, or what we call in Annex E, what we call design intents. And those design intents are as follows. First of all, preference. Does a light source render colors in a way that does not match high fidelity, but that most people actually prefer? Vividness. Does a light source, broadly speaking, enhance the saturation of colors? And of course, fidelity. Does a light source render colors in a way that is similar or identical to the reference light source? And in our analysis, it turns out that we learned that of the 149 measures that TM30 has in it right now, we only need to worry about 4. What a relief, right? That we don't need to track 149 different numbers. We only need to worry about 4. And to be honest with you, as we go through this, you're going to see that maybe you don't need to worry about those 4 at all. And but let's first talk about those measures. The first one is RF is the symbol. It is our fidelity index. So you can think of the RF as rendering. What kind of rendering? Fidelity. So this is very similar to CRI, but it's a different test. It's a harder test. And so we should not expect a light source with a given CRI value, let's say 85, to have the same RF value. Again, it's a different test. We're probably going to get a different number. The second measure is RG, again, rendering gamut. So the gamut index asks, broadly speaking, is this light source causing colors to increase in saturation or chroma? Is it causing colors to decrease in saturation or chroma? Or is it causing no change? And this is global, so we're averaging out the color shifts of all of the color samples that are used in TM30. It turns out, and we have decades of science that support this, red plays an outsized role in our perception of all colors. And because of red's outsized role, we want to look at not just the gamut index and a broad color saturation shift. We also want to take a look at what's happening with red as a control. So RCSH1 rendering chroma shift hue bin 1, and we'll look at hue bins in a moment, but just know that hue bin 1 is the bin that contains red. And the fourth measure, the fidelity of red rendering. And so with these 4, a broad fidelity metric, and then using the fidelity of red as a control, and a broad chroma metric, and then using the chroma shifting of red as a control, we can evaluate a light source and say with a lot of certainty, yes, this achieves our goals of color rendering for fidelity and or vividness and or preference. So let's talk about these 3 goals in a little bit more detail. Fidelity is the most common, right? Because that's what we're looking at when we're talking about CRI. How well does a light source match its reference? High fidelity light sources basically render colors in a way that we expect. Because we're looking at, is there a match or is there not a match? Any color shifts that occur are all penalized, and they're all penalized equally. There are lots of places where fidelity is and should be the overriding design intent. I think the classic one that lots of people like to give is in medical facilities, right? The color of your skin, of your tissue, the color of the beds of your nails. This gives doctors and other healthcare providers important information. So we don't want to distort those colors at all. We don't want to choose a light source that's going to make people look rosier and healthier than they in fact are. The next design intent is preference. And people are often asking me, like, whose preference? Your preference, Jason? No. The 5 studies we analyzed had, I don't quite remember, but I believe it was something like 135 participants. So this is a measure of, yes, I see what a high fidelity light source is doing to this set of materials, and I see what this other light source is doing to the colors of the same set of materials. And I've got to say, I like the second light source better. And when that happens over a broad range of light sources with a broad range of test subjects in a multitude of studies, we begin to be able to say the average person or most people are going to find certain characteristics of color rendering preferable to high fidelity. So it's not me, it's all of us, or most of us. What is that preference key? The preference key is that most people prefer light sources that slightly, not dramatically, but slightly increase the chroma of most colors. And again, we are giving extra attention to red. Because we are permitting or even preferring a little bit of chroma enhancement, when we deviate from the reference light source, that is okay. Sometimes that is even rewarded. There are lots of places where rather than high fidelity, we might want to target preference, right? We might want people to walk into a space and say, wow, I really like this. This just looks good. You know, retail, hospitality are a couple of great examples. And the final design intent that we know we can achieve and evaluate and achieve with TM-30 is vividness, right? Basically, is this light source causing broad enhancement of chroma or of saturation or of vibrancy of colors? We do want to keep in mind that the chroma enhancement in the vividness design intent exceeds that of the preference design intent. And so we may find that at very high levels of vividness, colors become distorted. They might not be preferred anymore. They might be perceived as cartoonish, if you will. But that doesn't mean that there's not a place for it, right? I mean, the classic example that I like to give, if I were lighting the Skittles store in Times Square, forget about fidelity. I'm going for vividness. I want the colors of all of those candies to just jump right into my eyes, right? So there are probably not as many places where we would use the vividness design intent, but there are locations, there are projects where it would be appropriate. So here's what we're talking about. Great, pizza, wood, look at the basil, the tomatoes look ripe, and this looks delicious. I would like to have this for lunch, please. Until we see this same meal not under a high fidelity light source, but under a high preference light source. Wow, look at that. It's warmer, the colors are a little bit more vivid. It's just overall, to most people, it's just a little bit more attractive. I would rather have this pizza, the high preference pizza, than the high fidelity pizza. Of course, we could keep pushing and go all the way to here, right? The high vividness light. Here, I don't know, I think maybe the tomatoes are plugged in and a little bit electric. I don't know what's on the pizza. In the left photo, maybe it's bacon. On the right photo, it's definitely red peppers. So by shifting the chroma, we may be, I don't know, we may be causing a little bit of confusion as to what some of these materials are. But again, there may be situations where that actually is a legitimate design goal. Moving on. So we've got these three design intents within Annex E: preference, vividness, and fidelity. Within the data, there were breaks and there were bulges that allowed us to introduce a little bit more subtlety, right? So it's not a question of, is this light source preferred or not preferred? But it's a question of, how likely are we, if we use this light source, to find that a broad range of people, if they understood our design goal, would agree that we had achieved it, right? So if my design goal is, I want to render colors in a way that is preferred, what are the characteristics of that SPD that would allow, I don't know, me to say yes with confidence? 90% of the people that see this and who understand preference are going to say, yeah, this is preferred. So we've called these tiers priority levels, and there are three priority levels. Priority level 1 is the most stringent, right? So the most likely to achieve this design goal. But because the criteria are stringent, we may find there are fewer products that meet this goal. Or the products that are available, I don't know, perhaps they're not as readily available, or perhaps they're not as, perhaps they're not the least expensive. Maybe they cost more. Fine, in that case, perhaps I want to look at fixtures that meet priority level 2, right? So still preferred, still enhancing vividness, still meeting the goals of fidelity, but with a slightly broader set of criteria. And there's the third level where the criteria is the broadest. So for preference only, there I have some numbers. So priority level 3, 65% of the people who understand what you're trying to do with preference will agree that you've achieved your preference goal. At priority level 2, that number rises to 85%. And if we have a light source that meets the criteria for priority level 1, we would say that better than 90% of the occupants of the space, if they understood that we had a color rendering goal and knew what it was, would say, yes, you've achieved that goal. Those percentages don't quite translate for vividness and fidelity. We don't quite have that in terms of percentages yet, but we do have it per preference. Okay, so this table is in Annex E. I have a copy of it on the bulletin board next to my monitor. These are the values for RF, RG, RCSH1, and RFH1 that relate to preference, vividness, fidelity, and our 3 priority levels, right? So we could ask a manufacturer, please give me these 4 TM30 values for a given fixture and light source combo, and then just take those numbers and look at these boxes and see where that light source falls. It is important to keep in mind that this graphic sort of illustrates that there is overlap. I mean, we could find a fixture that is P3 only, that is preferred, but preferred in a way that the color rendering is not very good. So it doesn't meet any of the fidelity specifications. Also does not increase saturation that much, so it doesn't even meet the V3, the vividness 3 specifications. But we can definitely find light sources that are high fidelity and high preference, and maybe even high fidelity, high preference with a little bit of vividness increase. So the P's, the V's, and the F's are not existing in isolation. And things like P2, F3, P2, F2 are very common in current white light LED products. So with the PVF, preference, vividness, fidelity, and with the priority level 1, 2, 3, we could find ourselves in a situation, and actually the color committee is hoping that manufacturers begin to adopt this, where we don't have to worry about the specifics of the numbers and the measures. We can just look at the PVF, right? We could have a fixture that is P2V dash, or some of us say V null, F3, right? So this is a light source that meets the criteria for priority level 2 of preference, does not meet the criteria for any of the 3 vividness priority levels, and that also meets the criteria for the fidelity priority level 3. This would be a pretty good light source, and it's reasonably common. Now let's see where we find this PVF, and also where we find the other 4 numbers. Within TM30, it automatically spits out 3 separate reports that manufacturers can publish. The simple report, which is this, is conceived of as maybe a quarter of a page in a cut sheet. So let's walk through this relatively quickly. We've got this colored background for reference. You can see that colored background is broken into 16 pie wedges, and those wedges are numbered, right? So we can see that hue bin 1, or wedge 1, is there on the right, just above the horizontal axis. That's where reds are located. There are also some reds in 16. We can see that 6 and 7 are where we would find greens. So that's for orientation. Now, in terms of saturation and hue, the black circle represents our reference light source, right? So it is there. And the red blob is the light source that we're measuring. And so this simple report is showing us some interesting things. Where the red line is outside of the black circle, that is telling us that colors in those hue bins are being increased in saturation. And the white circles are 10% increments. So we can sort of read into this a little bit, how much is chroma being increased in saturation. Where the red line is inside the black circle, that indicates a decrease in saturation in that hue bin for those colors. And again, the two white circles indicate 10% and 20% decreases in saturation. So we're getting a little bit of a guide there. Now, you can see these little arrows, the center of each hue bin, right? Where these arrows go straight out and straight in, what that is telling us is that the chroma is being affected, but there's little or no hue shift. Where those arrows are perhaps going around the perimeter of the circle, right? So they're pointing left and right, not in and out. That is indicating that there is some hue shift happening to colors in that hue bin. And it's also telling us what direction the hues are being shifted. We've also got in the four corners the four key measures as they apply to Annex E. Down in the lower right here, we've got the color temperature and also the DUV of this particular light source. And then in the top right, we've got the PVF specification, right? So this light source, again, is a P2 V null F3. So the only thing that a manufacturer needs is the SPD. So if you've got the SPD, you plop it into the TM30 calculator. This report is generated automatically. Should be relatively easy for manufacturers to provide this to us. If we wanted more information, we could ask for an intermediate report. So this is all the same info, but here we're getting a more granular look at what is happening to chroma shift in each of the 16 bins, and also what is happening to hue shift in each of the 16 bins. And this wave, this is very common. We see this on almost all light sources. Rather than this being a circle that is entirely outside of the reference circle or inside, most light sources tend to be an oval, or most LED light sources tend to be an oval, wherein some colors are enhanced in saturation, some colors are decreased in saturation. Here is the full report. So this is conceived of as being a full page that would be included in the cut sheet or maybe posted online as a separate document. And you can see that it's also giving us the SPD of the light source and of the reference. It's giving us the local fidelity shift for the 16 hue bins. And it's actually, TM30 uses 99 color samples in its evaluation. So this thing across the bottom here is the fidelity for this light source for all 99 of the color samples. So, okay, I want to know what the PDF is, or I want to know what these four key measurements are, and I can go look at the table myself. At a minimum, we would like to ask for the simple report. If we can get the intermediate or the full report, so much the better. A little more information never hurts. Now let's take a look at how we might implement TM30 in a phase-by-phase basis, right? So in schematic design, we don't have a great deal of information, and we don't have a design that's terribly fleshed out. But we probably can, either on a global project basis or perhaps on a space-by-space basis, give some thought to what are the color rendering goals for our project and maybe make some determinations, right? In this space, preference is what I'm after. In that space, fidelity is what I'm after. Great. And I don't know, like if you get really adept at doing this, and if you have sufficient information in schematic design, you might even be able to assign some priority levels, right? Like in this space, at a minimum, I want a P3 fixture, but I'd prefer a P2. And if we get that far in schematic, I think that you're probably in a good place. So, for example, I'm lighting a restaurant. What do I want? Well, broadly speaking, I want a light source that's going to like make the food look really good. And I don't want to just focus on food, but I also want to focus on the people. So I want this light source to be flattering to skin tones. Both of those things immediately tell me that I want to be looking at preference, right? Not at fidelity. If we're talking about flattering things, enhancing appeal of things, that's preference. On the other hand, if I'm lighting an office and the corporate color is blue and it's being used as a broad accent color throughout the space, I don't want to distort that corporate color. I want that corporate color to look exactly as expected everywhere. And that tells me I probably am looking for a high fidelity light source in this particular office space. Now, as you know, when we get into DD, our design starts to get fleshed out. We start to select fixtures. We start to ask questions about, CCT and CRI and what's the driver and how's it being controlled. It's at this point, I think, when we're picking fixtures, that we can begin to either look at the cut sheet and see if there's TM30 info, look online and see if there's a supplemental download that has TM30 info. And if there's not, maybe we need to begin to compose an email to the rep that says, hey, listen, I need this TM30 info and I need the manufacturer to provide it for me. I have certainly had times when I've made that request, and what I've received back is a spreadsheet that is just two columns. Column 1 is the wavelength, and column 2 is the energy at that wavelength. Not a problem, because I can go to the IES website, I can navigate my way to the spectral calculator, and I can just basically tell it what I'm going to do. Set the start wavelength, set the end wavelength, set the interval, and then this table over here populates, and then I can just copy paste the entire column of the energy into that table, hit the calculate button, and boom, I've just generated my own TM30 reports. And I can download them as a graphic, I can download them as a PDF, I can download them as an SPDX file, but I've got the info that I need. So I would rather that TM30 reports were available online and I could get them when I want them. But if what I need to do is receive a spreadsheet, I can work with that. That's fine. The other thing that I might do, some of our spectroradiometers have TM30 calculations built into them. Others of our radiometers are able to output to our desktops a spreadsheet with the SPD. So maybe what I'm doing is I'm getting a sample from my rep and I'm metering that sample, and then I'm going to go ahead and generate my own TM30 report. That's fine. I've done that too. Now within DD, because we have overlap, we may find that we want to target more than one design intent. So for instance, I might want a fixture that is P1 or P2, that is preference in my restaurant. But the P2 is a little broad. The P2 permits a little bit more decrease in saturation than I am comfortable with, because I've been working with TM30 for a while and I know what this means. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to require that we also meet any of the 3 fidelity priority levels, and that's going to act as a check against a decrease in saturation. If that were the case, I might find that I am now accepting of all 6 of these specifications. I'm not looking for just one combo. I'm open to actually 6 combos Let's see what the manufacturers are producing today. Let's see what they're able to offer. We're not necessarily going to get everything we want because the SPD might not exist in a commercial fixture. So great, I've got these 6 that are available, or that I'm willing to accept. Hopefully I can hit 2 or 3 of these, 4 of these with a variety of fixtures. And then I've got some options in terms of features and price and lead time and things like that. In an office, we might do the same thing, right? I really want to control for blues. I'm going to look at, or I'm going to require a fixture that meets F1. However, it doesn't need to be strictly F1 if it also meets any of the preference specifications. I'm accepting of that, right? So great, I will accept any of these 3. And now I can look at fixtures. I can reach out to my reps. Hey, do you have such and such light for an office project? It needs to meet one of these. The SPD needs to meet one of these 3 specifications. And as manufacturers become more accustomed to these kinds of requests, as reps become more accustomed to these kinds of requests, this should be, please, this should just become run-of-the-mill. This should just become the way we work. And we just leave CRI behind. If blue or if any other color is of real special concern, you can drill down with the full report. You can drill down into all of the aspects of color rendering of that. So for blue, Hubin 11 holds the center of blue. So I might look at local fidelity of Hubin 11. Higher is better fidelity, right? So higher means minimized shifts. I might look at the hue shifting of Hubin 11, right? Closer to 0 is a minimized shift. And I might also look at chroma shifting, and closer to 0 is also minimized shift. So if I had an RF of 90, an RHS of 0, and an RCS of 0, I've got great rendering and no color shifting on the blues. How do we hold our specification? This is a problem that we face all of the time, and it exists in the world of TM30 also. And at the moment, we on the color committee see 3 possibilities, right? Possibility number 1, require a TM30 report as part of your submittal. Require a TM30 report, and then you can take a look at that report, and you get the submittal for a substitution, and you're able to say, no, the color rendering qualities of this light source fail to meet our design goals, and you can reject it. Option number 2 might be to list your PVF specification in your fixture schedule, and then to include some text kind of like this in your specification. And then when you get your submittal and you get the TM30 report with the submittal, you can see quite clearly whether or not it's meeting your requirements. And if it doesn't, as it says here, right in the specification, it's rejected. Couple of different ways to do that. I'm certainly not going to tell everybody here how to make a fixture schedule. There's so many variations on that theme in the world. But here are 2 possibilities, right? Where if we're using the PVF system, maybe there's a column in our fixture schedule that we use to describe the light source. And in that case, we can just sort of say TM30 and then blah, here's what we're after. On the other hand, if we're a little bit more measurement and number focused, maybe we want to call out the actual measures and the acceptable values for each one of our fixtures. And of course, then you get your submittal, you get your substitution, you just look and it's like, nope, this doesn't meet it. It's out. It's rejected. The third approach would be a global approach, where we're just going to say for this entire project, and you can put the text into your spec, for this entire project, unless otherwise noted, all fixtures have to have, SPDs that meet the following criteria. And I mean, I've chosen these, but like you can make your own decisions. I have to meet F1, or I have to meet P3, or I have to meet F2, P2, right? Whatever, figure out what the numbers are and you can just include them here. I know that was fast. How are we doing on time? Not bad. A couple of things coming up that some of you might be interested in. The color committee's been working very hard. We're meeting every other week to write a user's guide for TM30. And at the moment, it is going to be titled LP30, a comprehensive guide to specifying color rendition. Those of you that might serve on application committees know that the ANSI process takes time, but we think this is going to be available before the end of next year. So keep an eye out. If you get the monthly or the weekly email blast from the IES, you'll see this announced when it becomes available. The other thing is, if any of you are headed down to Archlight Summit in Dallas in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be giving a 90-minute presentation and demo with my color committee co-chair, Tony Esposito. We're going to be giving it a total of 4 times over 2 days. And what's really great about this, Archlight Summit is really supportive. They've given us a dedicated room with I mean, they dress it up beautifully, and then we've got these really terrific light fixtures, and there's a 30 to 35-minute live demo where we sort of show you some of these different PVF combinations and why red is so important. And it's a really terrific demo, and we're always really excited about it when we get to do it. So if you're going to be in Dallas, sign up and come by. And that's it. That's all I got for you. So let me stop sharing. And questions?
So, Jason, before we get into the questions for the audience in the chat, just a couple of things that I want to kind of, I think maybe many people may have. First thing I would have is that this is, you're asking us to change. That for many on the presentation today on the webinar, I've been working on this. My father used CRI. My grandfather used CRI. So why should I change? In just a 1 minute, give me a reason why I should change.
Well, I think the first reason is CRI was introduced in 1965. It has undergone 2 minor revisions, which are really technical corrections, the last one being in 1995. Color science has moved on.
Yeah.
I mean, you would not want a computer from 1965 or a color TV or a car from 1965. Why are we relying on 1965 technology to evaluate color rendering? We should not be. Let's move on.
My second question is, so we've introduced something called PVF. Mm-hmm. In your second scenario, you suggested, so in the way we communicate, way a specifier communicates directly to what they want to a rep as it goes out for bids or whatever, and then the evaluation is done and so forth. You've got 9 blocks, right? So you've got 3 across and you've got 3 down. Mm-hmm. So this is probably for us, as far as whether you're a rep or whether you're a specifier, the most important, significant communication learning that could take place in probably a half a century. Yeah. is to really understand, and then from there we peel the onion back and we learn more about the numbers, the fidelity, the gamut, and so forth and so on. But would you say that becoming familiar with those ratings of P1, V2, F2, what that means, and communicating that, wouldn't that be really a very high priority as far as our request and hope from today?
I think that it can be, and that it probably should be, because it is simpler than dealing with the measurements and the numbers, right? I mean, we never say I need a light source that has a CRI of 85, and both 84 and 87 are unacceptable, right? So we're dealing with ranges, and the ranges are built in with the PVF system. You don't have to make them up yourself.
The other comment I would have is we have people that are tuning in today that are in the first grade. We have people that are in graduate school, relatively speaking. So we started out with a presentation introducing this, and then we moved up into higher elementary, middle school, high school, college, and so then we wound up in graduate school. So I want to just say a message to everyone that's tuning in. If you felt like this was highly technical, we have people tuning in there at the graduate level, and we have people tuning in today that are in elementary school. This is not bad. But it's like we learn this we eat an elephant a bite at a time. We learn this all along. So if you feel like the fire hose has been out and you're being blown away today, don't be discouraged, because there are going to be many more sessions, and we can speak at the level that you are where you are, so that you can understand and build the building blocks to get up to where you need to go. So that's the application guide that Jason mentioned that's coming out next year will be a tremendous resource for this. So I don't want anyone to be discouraged, because we did have some highly technical level information, because the graduate students love this. But those of you who are in elementary school, this was too much, really. But what Jason has done is laid out a pathway, or of where this is going. It's not, but it's by no means a message to be discouraged. And so, Jason, you have given this presentation, and this is to the IES, a more technical society, but you've also addressed the ALA with podcast, American Lighting Association, which is mainly residential. We have interior designers that are on today. So what would you say to an interior designer regarding the new metrics of color and so forth?
I would, in a way, I think that lighting designers should be more interested and excited about this than lighting. I mean, they're the ones that are choosing the color palette, right? And sometimes, perhaps even often, there's beautiful subtlety, and they don't want it to be lost.
Exactly.
And to just say CRI of 80 or better, I mean, CRI of 80, you don't know what you're getting or what's happening to your color palette. Even with CRI of 90, like, you don't know what the color shifts are. You don't know where and how. So this gives us a lot more information. And I would love to be sitting in a meeting with an interior designer who says something like, I want to see a high preference light source in this space because of what I'm doing with the materials and what the client has asked me to do with the materials. I'm like, that's terrific. You understand lighting.
So what we're announcing today is we have a mode of communication now to be able to give that interior designer or that architect or that lighting designer what they're really wanting. We have a way to communicate that, where previously we did not have that nearly to the degree that we do now.
And with CRI, the only thing we had was high fidelity.
Yeah.
And there's, as I said in the beginning of this presentation, there's so many more possibilities. And TM-30 is not done. People are still doing research on it. We're talking about the possibility of introducing if we can figure it out, a metric for skin tone rendering, which we think could be really great. Like, and we're also looking at a metameric mismatch measurement, right? Where you might LEDs from company A and company B, they're both 3000K, but why aren't they matching? Or how can we tell how well they're going to match?
And
So there's I hope more to come, but what's here right now is just so much more and so much better.
So the last question I would have is, as we leave here today in our webinar, we have a number of reps that are here that call on specifiers. Mm-hmm. We have a number of specifiers that are tuning in. However, doesn't represent everyone. So as they call the message, what would you recommend the way they discuss this so that they will not get the deer in the headlights look, and they will be able to drink the Kool-Aid or begin to drink the Kool-Aid of saying, oh, I understand this. So what would be just a very simple suggestion as a way to start this process?
If I were a rep and I were able to educate myself about this, I think that the way to understand this system is that you need to see it in action, right? And so I would love to have a space where I had 10 different light sources with 10 different PVF combinations. And I was lighting the same objects or the same materials over and over, so that you could spend some time looking at it and start to get an understanding. And I think that maybe at a minimum, what that means is if I'm a rep and I want to talk to somebody about this, I got to bring two lights, right? A P3 and an F1. And let's look at how they render colors differently and what that
Very
means.
good.
Yeah.
Kind of like the old color boxes with CRI.
Exactly. Or the color boxes with color temperatures, right?
Okay.
Except that now instead of 4 color temperature boxes, in an ideal world, we might have 15 color rendering boxes, because there are conceivably that many combinations. Now, whether or not they're commercially available is another question. But
Excellent.
If manufacturers were to really pick this up and run with it, you'd be able to they could really focus in on some very specific marketing messages, rather than just, we make things look pretty.
Excellent. So we're almost to the hour. And so what I'd like to do is say to everyone who has only 1 hour, this is the presentation. However, we are going to continue for about 15 minutes and go to the chat and see if we can address Jason, the what's in the chat. So the first one I have in the chat here, and let me just get all the way to the top here, is a comment here that says, Jason, super simple and understandable presentation for a very technical and deep topic. I love the pointers to allow ease of application of TM-30. So we've addressed that in a little bit of my question, I think, regarding the fact that it is simple, and what your recommendation, I love it, of taking 2 light sources and showing it. And so seeing is believing, and seeing is understanding. So I think that addresses that. The second question, that was from the second question is from Isabel, is how would this interact with software rendering programs?
Right now, it doesn't, because right now, I'm not aware of any rendering program that is capable of understanding an SPD.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for those that may not be, we know we have some guests today that are just entering this for the first time. They're not lighting practitioners, but they're interested in color. So CRI stands for Color Rendering Index. And so that's just the way colors, as you mentioned, the way our colors appear under the light source compared to a reference source. That's what we've been dealing with for years. And now we're stepping up our game. We're no longer driving a 1965 car. We're driving a 2023 car. So I love the analogy. And so, hi, Jason. I've been taking notes and missed the details on design intents of fidelity and preference. So being able to just jot those down would be super helpful. So we have this in recording. The best way to really revisit this, and the beauty part about a recording, is that you can go to our YouTube channel in the future and you can listen to this explanation. If you need to review it 3 or 4 times, that's the beauty of a recording. Do not feel bad if you need to listen to things 3 or 4 times. I do. If there's something I'm trying to learn and I don't understand it, I listen to it until I get it. So that would be our #1 tool from a section point of view, but you may want to say something regarding this as far as design intents.
For fidelity and preference. So fidelity is the fidelity design intent is about a spectrum that very closely matches the reference light source. And what that's going to do is essentially it's going to show colors in a way that people expect. Whereas the preference design intent acknowledges that people actually prefer a light source that causes modest increase in saturation or chroma or vividness. And so when we say we're looking for a high preference light source, what we're looking for is a light source that does cause that modest increase. And these two are not mutually exclusive. There are plenty of SPDs, plenty of light sources that might be an F1P3 or a P2 F2, right? So they're not separate, but there's not complete overlap either.
Excellent. So I will direct you also back to your flyer for today, where we had various items, and we changed we kept the fidelity the same, and we changed the vividness, and we had some ratings. So if anyone would like some comparison slides, I have those. I own those. You can email me for a little bit more look. If you are not going to a conference immediately, you maybe not have the information immediately. So you say, how does different ratings render various items? So you can contact me. I'll put my email in the chat, and I can send you some things. So the last one we have is comparison recommendation. Sounds like a previous manufacturer that this person as well as me work with. But the question would be, is an overall room better, or is just a smaller color box or smaller area, like when you mentioned taking two samples like a rep would do into a specifier? Would you comment on, is one better than the other, or both work, or how does that work?
Well, certainly when we're doing color rendering studies, the setup that they have down at NIST, the setup that they have at Pacific Northwest National Labs or at Penn State, they do rooms, right? Because we want to ask about the experience of a room. However, you can't travel with a room.
Right.
Your rep may not have the resources to populate a room with materials and then populate the ceiling with a variety of fixtures with different things. So I think the more reasonable approach would be a basket of objects of different colors.
Yep.
That we can light with one light, sort of see what's going on, and then light it with the second light and see what's going on, and sort of discuss and analyze the difference between the two. And
if you're wondering, well, what should those items be? The color committee came up with those items and presented it first at an IES annual conference a few years ago. Tony Exposito, who is co-chair with Jason. Mm-hmm. And so if you just look at your flyer, you can go out and buy those items and take your two light sources, and you're in business. Yep. So,
and if you're asking not about the system and PVF system and how to learn it, but if you're asking about a particular project, call your interior designer, get samples.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have any more comments in the chat. So let me just, Jason, thank you so much for this presentation. And I'm going to turn it back over to Greg to take us out.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, and thank you, Bob. Very interesting presentation. I think we all learned a lot and still have a lot to learn. So great topic to go into today. Just wanted to point out in the chat, if you have any additional questions, we have links to email addresses to send additional questions to. And also there's the link for the YouTube account. So the recording will be up at some point. It may take a couple of days or a week or so to get up, but As Bob pointed out, you can go back and watch the presentation as many times as you need. So again, we just want to thank everybody for joining us today and for all the members and participation in the webinar today. So please keep an eye out on your email for the next Lighthouse Educational webinar, and hope you all have a great day. Thank you.